Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bonnie Bernstein. Thank you so much for joining our mental health panel today. This is a really important conversation at a critical time. If either you played sports or you have kids who played sports, you're probably aware that we're starting to be more open about the athlete mental health conversation. We're starting to understand that making your mind strong is as important as making your body strong. And we have some wonderful panelists here to shed light on this very important topic from a medical perspective, from an athletic director's perspective, and from an athlete's perspective. So without further ado, let me introduce our panelists. If you are a Michigan fan, you know this guy. If you are an NFL fan, you know this guy. He's a Super Bowl champion from the University of Michigan, Amani Toomer. Scott Goldman is one of the most well-respected high-performance psychologists in the country. He's worked in the college football space. He's worked in the NFL space. He's currently the high-performance psychologist for the Golden State Warriors. Scott Goldman.
Hi. And I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Yeah, definitely.
We're heavy on Michigan in this panel. Jake Butt won the Mackey Award his last year in college as the best tight end in the country, an All-American who spent a few seasons in the NFL. Jake Butt joining us as well.
No problem. We're flexible.
And Greg Byrne, you Tide fans know him well. He is your athletics director, also kind enough to be with us today. Greg, come on out.
Roll Tide.
How did I know that was coming?
It's coming.
Yeah. So you know, we're going to leave about 10 minutes to ask questions. I really encourage you to raise your hand, ask a question of our amazing panelists. For those of you who are watching at home, hello. Thanks for watching our live stream. I'm going to be keeping an eye on my phone. If you tweet me a question with the hashtag CFPAllAccess, my Twitter account is @BonnieBernstein. I'm going to try to get to some of your questions virtually as well. So, I'm not even sure who I want to start with. I encourage you to all riff off each other. But I'm just curious why you feel, based on your personal and professional experience, why it's so important to be having this conversation around mental health right now. And Jake, we'll start with you, because why not?
I mean, it matters because it matters. I think, you see a lot of people, we're trying to destigmatize this. You're seeing a lot of people are struggling with, whether it's depression or anxiety, a number of different mental health issues. And for my own personal story, I got injured consistently throughout my NFL career. I missed one game in my college, I get to the NFL, and I'm repeated injury after injury after injury. I can get over the physical aspect. I wouldn't be in the NFL otherwise. It was the mental aspect that came with it that really, made me reach rock bottom and have to, explore other options, healthy options to bring myself back to balance, like meeting with mental health coaches like Scott. So it really matters. I think the conversations are starting to expand around it, and I think that's a really good thing.
Amani, you've got a couple of kids, and interestingly enough, when we were getting ready to have this conversation, I won't date you by saying the years that you were at Michigan,
Yeah.
But you said, hey, we had mental health coaches back then. What was the experience like at a time when we weren't really talking about this stuff?
Yeah, we had a mental health. It was more, they didn't use the word mental health. They used more the term of somebody who would help the freshmen kind of indoctrinate them into college football, indoctrinate them into the whole college experience. So, we talked to a guy, and it was a great experience. I thought he helped me a lot, but then at the end of the day, with mental health, there has to be a trust between your provider and the athlete. And it just got to a point where I didn't really trust that the mental health provider had my interest in mind. He had the team's interest in mind, because the team was the one who was actually paying him. So it was a tricky situation that I really, I used it and I took advantage of it as much as I possibly could. But then once it started feeling funny, I stepped away from it. But it's a great idea to try and get people who are, coming from all over the country, because at the time Michigan was a national school in terms of where we recruited from everywhere, and getting people together from all different parts of the country isn't as easy as you would think it is, because there's people with totally different experiences for 17, 18 years of their life, and all of a sudden they come into this one environment and they're supposed to just get along, and there's a lot of conversations that need to happen. There's a lot of understanding and empathy that has to take place. And and you put people in this situation where there's 100,000 people watching them every week and telling them how great they are. It's a recipe for somebody not being able to realize the situation they're in, put it into a category, and not letting it get too much for themselves, and have them think that they're something that they're not, and have them think that they're these superheroes, when basically you're just good at football, and you're a good football player that is also has academic responsibilities, and it's hard to kind of level yourself in that situation when you're so young and there's so many people looking at you and so many people interested in you, and at the back of my mind, I never really understand why. I mean, I could just play football and I was good at school. That was about it.
Well, I would imagine, Greg, that's something that resonates with you, being at the school that's, what, 6 championships under Saban, going for back-to-backs for the second time in his tenure there. But this is something that's been a passion of yours dating back to the University of Arizona. So when this wasn't as much at the forefront of the social consciousness as it is now, why was it so much on your radar?
Well, guy two over from me, Dr. Goldman, had a big influence on that. I'm of the generation, and I know you're a lot younger than me, Bonnie, but
Checks in the mail, Greg.
Yeah, when we were growing up, you didn't go to counseling, right? If somebody
you
didn't talk about it, if somebody did it, you're like, you're not sure what to do about that. And now with the younger generations, it's something that they're very open about, they talk about, and so early on, and I'm not saying this by any means is the only cause, okay? But what I can tell you is I think as the phones have continued to adjust, you're on stage all the time, the social media pressures, that has created a whole nother level of anxiety, sometimes depression that's coming from that. When you go into a locker room after a game now, coach gets done talking whatever the sport is, everybody goes to their phone. Instant reaction with that. And that's going to have reinforcement, and that's also going to have challenge that comes along with it. So how do you constructively deal with that? So when Scott and I first came into each other's lives in about 2010, and we were just trying to figure this out, what is this new world, this new reality that we're in? I remember when I went to Arizona, I still had a BlackBerry, right? It didn't have an iPhone yet. And then over the next couple years, the iPhones come in, and the clarity of the pictures and everything that's taking place, and we all are under this pressure to have this perfect life. That doesn't exist. And so we're all human, and when we all have shortfalls in what we do and who we are, we have a lot of different ways to react to that. And sometimes that anxiety, that depression is something that happens and people don't understand it. And so that's going to affect everything else that they do in their life. And so one of the things, and Scott and I've talked a lot about it over the years, what I love about college athletics, and Amani's talking about the locker room, everybody coming together. College sports is one of the few things left where everybody from all different backgrounds, you're going to see it in the stadium tomorrow, you're going to see it on the field, that you check your political differences, you check race differences, you check all these different things that sometimes will cause consternation in lives. And you all come together for the Michigan Wolverines. You all come together for the Alabama Crimson Tide, even the Georgia Bulldogs, right? I see some Georgia fans out here. There we go. And so that's something that you need to make sure you're creating as healthy an environment as you can. And the mental health side of it is a critical component with everybody that we have working together for a common cause. And so I'm a big believer in it, and we make sure we support it however we can.
So on one hand, it's wonderful that we can have an open conversation about this now in a way we haven't been able to before. The flip side of that, it's good, but it also raises a lot of questions. Because it's out there everywhere, how do you know, Scott, if there's truly an issue you need to get help for, or if you're just hyper aware of it, or if it's a time in a season where you're just grinding? When guys are going through two-a-days at the beginning of the season, nobody likes that, unless you're a little off your rocker to start with. Nobody likes that. You're getting pounded. So if you're an athlete and you're trying to figure this out in your head, what are some of the signs? What are the tells that maybe it'll help me if I talk to somebody?
Oh, I appreciate the question, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. Before I answer that, I just want to go back one click.
Sure.
Amani made a really incredible statement where he talked about trust. And I think
I was going to get to that.
Oh, I mean, and it's so spot on, because I think the relationship, it's not about the individual who's providing the service. It's about the relationship. It's about the work. And that comes from trust, which is not an easy thing to build or establish. And Greg makes another fantastic point that you can combine, where he talks about the locker room. And I think the thing is, one thing I've discovered in the 20 years I've been doing this, the locker room doesn't lie. One of the most incredible compliments I ever got when I was working for an NFL team was a free agent came and said, "Hey, I'd like to work with you." And I said, I'm honored and thank you. And he said, I spoke to the guys in the locker room, and they said, "You're a good dude, you're good at what you do, and I'm ready to work." And I can't tell you the kind of endorsement from a locker room and how valuable it is. So I'm just grateful. When you ask, why are we talking about this now? I think it's really easy to depersonalize who we watch on TV. When we watch these gentlemen play, it's almost like we're watching a TV show, so we forget that they are somebody's son, somebody's friend, somebody's cousin. And so I think what's really nice about the conversation is we're returning a little bit of the humanity that might be lost through that social media mechanism, right, Greg? And so I'm grateful that the people on this panel are talking about it, especially those that have a whole lot of attention to them. So I said I promise I'd get back to your question, but I couldn't leave that alone and express my gratitude for the three of you for being up here and talking about such an important subject. So the question was what again?
The question is what now? How do you know? How do you know if what's going on in your head is normal because you're grinding and the season's tough, or there's something bigger going on that you need to get help with?
Yeah, so I think the answer to that question is kind of an interesting one, because when you think of sports psychology, it's a specialization, not a special population. And what I mean by that is a special population is the guys that come to my office just happen to be wearing different clothing than somebody else. But a specialization is understanding that when you're doing two-a-days in June in Arizona, the offensive linemen are not super happy about running stadiums. I mean, you got 300 pounds, it's 100 degrees outside, there's no game in sight. So of course, there's a moment of doubt and pain of, why am I doing this? What do I want to be here for? And should I retire now, kind of thing. And I think without a special understanding of that unique circumstance, the nature of the conversation, the nature of the treatment can go in a lot of different directions. So to your question of like, when do you start to pathologize or when do you start to diagnose? I actually tend to divert away from that and focus on the idea of, if somebody's hurting, whether it's a bad day or they're frustrated, or even if they're not hurting but they want to improve their perspective, then that's what the conversation's about. It's not about a go, no go kind of thing. It's really just about, because I think something, and I'll get off my soapbox, I appreciate the time and generosity from you all, but when you're operating at a pro level like Jake and Amani, like, they can get out of bed and still feel depressed. And so it becomes the idea of talking to somebody who says, I'm not at my level. My level might be different than somebody else's level, but I'm not at my level, and that's what I want to address.
Yeah. Amani, because you felt like there were trust issues with the way the folks you were working with were going, I know you subsequently worked with other mental health coaches when you were playing for the Giants. In terms of the criteria that you were looking for to find the person who is right for you, and please understand, psychology is not a one-size-fits-all proposition. A psychologist who may be good for one person may not be the right fit for the other. So don't feel like if you send your kid to somebody and he or she's like, oh, it's not working, it's okay. There's a process, just like finding a doctor, regular doctor, that you go through. So Amani, when you were going about finding folks to work with when you were with the Giants, What were your criteria? What was it about the people you were working with that helped you feel comfortable, that helped you gain that trust that you had lost?
Well, I think the first thing is, my goal was to be the best player that I could be, right? And sometimes when you're striving for that, you're not going to be, it's not going to be something that's completely healthy, right? Like, you have to sacrifice a lot of things in your life to go to that next level. And so there's a balance of how much do I want to be normal, how much do I want to be okay, to how much do I want to sacrifice to get to where I want to be. And I wanted somebody that understands that to get to where I want to be, I can't be normal. Because if I'm normal, then I'm just going to be like everybody else. If I try to get to that next level, I'm going to be a little crazy at times in terms of how much work I put in, how much emphasis I put in on the minute details. And I need somebody to understand that. And if that person doesn't understand that and says, oh, no, that's too much, you're overdoing it, then I don't know if that's the right person. There got to be somebody that you're doing a lot, and that I want you to understand that you're doing a lot, but I know this is what you need to do to get to that next level. And that's kind of understanding where I want to be, understanding that it's not going to be just the ordinary thing. It's going to be a little nutty sometimes in terms of how much I work out, how much I pay attention, how much I sit in my room and throw balls. And there's a lot of stuff that you do that nobody sees that is necessary to get to that next level, that people look at you like, why are you doing all that? Because I want to be there. That's one of the things.
You've had a lot of success working with mental health professionals. You've talked about anxiety and depression. What sort of tools have you been empowered with that have really helped you?
Well, can I kind of go back a little bit again to the trust, because I think it really matters. Because so I remember my rookie year in the NFL, I had just been drafted. I tore my ACL in the bowl game. I slipped in the draft, lost probably millions of dollars. This new identity that I'm the injured guy when I'd never been injured. I vividly remember this path of prioritizing mental health. I was sitting in my beautiful condo in a high-rise apartment. I had a car paid for, more money than I'd ever had in my life, everything on paper that I thought meant happiness. And it was the most low moment in my life, and it was extremely isolating. And in a sense, I felt guilty for feeling so bad, because everyone around me told me they would switch places with me in a heartbeat. And that was a really paradoxical moment where it's like, should I really feel guilty? Because I'm a human being just like everybody else. So having the right person in place where you do feel you can trust them and they're going to meet you halfway with some empathy, that's the first step. That's the tool. Now, I have another perspective too, is I just retired from the NFL just a couple months ago because of these injuries. They piled up. I continued to get hurt. That transition away, you see a lot of guys struggle. And I wonder why. I think there's a big neurochemical aspect of this, of the dopamine rush. If you guys are familiar with dopamine, that feel good, that motivational chemical. What better dopamine rush than when it's 3rd and 6 and there's 110,000 people, it's Ohio State versus Michigan, and they dial up Jake Butt's number and I make a play and the whole crowd goes nuts and they're cheering for you. That's a high you will not get anywhere else. And then all of a sudden you're done with football. That you will not find that high anywhere else. Naturally, you see a lot of people go towards, alcohol or drugs or unhealthy things to chase that high. Again, this is where mental health becomes a priority. So it's great to have these conversations because, and it's true for anybody. If you're a father of a beautiful family, you got a great job, you may feel guilty that, hey, I'm not allowed to feel bad. I have to take care of a family. I'm not allowed to have these conversations. So this conversations is a great cool tool in and of itself to destigmatize, to get out there and put yourself out there and have these conversations, because it's a pressure that gets built up and eventually it explodes, and that's where the big problems occur. So finding the right person, finding healthy ways to cope with the low parts of your life, having conversations, even within your friend group and your family, those are all things that can really help, push this agenda forward for people to really prioritize their mental health.
Greg, I would imagine one of the big detractors from student athletes seeking help is the inevitable conversation they may have to have with a coach about what's going on. So, sure, we as athletes, we can take that step. But how do you handle the other piece? What sort of conversations do you have with your coaches, with your staff, to be empathetic and encouraging? Because that doesn't come naturally to a lot of coaches, especially the old school ones in football.
Yeah, and actually, you say that, you got to give Coach Saban a ton of credit, because he was one of the first football coaches at a prominent level that really embraced mental health and the importance of it, whether it was sports psychology, whether it was behavioral medicine, whatever it may be. He was out there in front, and you know, certainly before my time at Alabama, but we've tried to continue to enhance it. We were investing in that for our student athlete experience, and we thought it had many benefits personally, athletically, academically, across the board, and we continue to believe that today. I really think 10 years ago, I think Scott would probably back me up on this, and you guys may too. 10 years ago, you probably had to talk to your coaches about it, have them understand, hey, this is why we're trying to do this. This is why we have Scott Goldman running around the hallways and the teams and, you know, around, and who is this guy? Now they're like, if you don't have that, why not? It's not only from a good from a well-being standpoint of your kids, and that has to be the reason.
Is that part of a recruiting conversation?
Everything's recruiting, Bonnie.
Yeah,
and so yes, it is part of recruiting now. And I was just Dr. Gilmore, who oversees our mental health services for us, she gave me some materials here. We spent almost $1 million last year on mental health support as a department. And we have internal support, but we also have a number of people in our community who are at our beck and call, really, because mental health doesn't know any schedules, right? It could be 2 o'clock in the morning when somebody has a significant episode. We need to be ready to support them during that time. And that may be a young man or a young woman that hasn't shown one sign, hasn't reached out to one person, and then all of a sudden at 2 o'clock in the morning, something happens, and something, you hear the word triggered, something triggers it to where we need to be there to support that, and that's a reality of the general student body. So if it's a reality for the general student body, it's going to be a reality for the athletic department too, and the student athletes that are there. So we do have an obligation to be there to support that. So I think the question's good, but I think there's much more of an acceptance from a coaching standpoint now than what it was 10 years ago.
Well, and just to add to Greg's statement, first of all, it's just great to hear your voice again. It's been a while. And I'm having all these warm memories. And one of them that comes back to me was when Greg would talk to our student athletes at the beginning of the year, he would really emphasize how much he cared for them. And it was very genuine. It was very real. And it was with such a level of effectiveness that there was an incident. Do you remember there was a football player who was really struggling who just showed up at your office one day crying? And I just remember getting a call, and Greg's like, Scott, you got to get up here. This guy's really hurting. And so when you think about leadership setting a tone that makes a player feel welcome enough to come to his office saying, I need help. And I think there's a lot of wisdom and impact there that can't quite be translated in an objective measure of like dollars and cents. Like, that's just a real human being. And then to double down on it, what could be very tempting there is to say, well, let me see how I can save this individual. Instead, what Greg did was he said, let me do a handshake so that you can talk to somebody with a level of training and expertise that can really help you beyond just the conversation that you and I can have. I mean, that's like 1 + 1 = 5. And so that's just a memory as I'm listening to you talk. I go, man, that was a really impactful day, especially for that individual. So I'm glad that we had the opportunity to help him.
So if you're a parent and you have an athlete who is leaving and living away from home for the first time, being independent, you're just wanting to check in to make sure he or she are feeling okay, and something feels off, but you don't know how to have that conversation because you've never dealt with it before. Scott, what sort of questions, how can mom or dad or guardian or loved one have that conversation in a way that doesn't have the athlete immediately shutting down and closing off?
Well, great question. And I would love to hear Amani and Jake's answer to that too. So if we can all kind of chime in on it, because I think this is relevant for all three of us, and maybe all four of us. Here's what I would start with. I find as a parent, sometimes we can get very uncomfortable when our child is hurting. And when we get uncomfortable, especially anxious, and what we want to do is remove that discomfort, what we have a tendency to do is talk, and we talk a little bit too much. Same thing with coaches. One of the things that I recommend to coaches a lot is I go, hey, I know it's important to you, but you're over talking to try to make, and I just want to make sure my point's coming across. I go, I get that. I want to make sure your point's coming across too, but you're over talking. So the first thing that I recommend is I say, you need to listen deeply. And sometimes it's not listening to the words, it's also listening to the actions. So sometimes, and I think we all as parents can kind of commiserate with this experience where sometimes the times you really want to express your frustration with your child is the time where you have to listen the most, right? So it's like, okay, Billy, you just drew crayon on the wall, and that's a pretty expensive thing, and I'm pretty angry. But instead it's like, okay, Billy, you just did something, and I think you're trying to send me a message. I'm listening. And I think that's no different than if we're talking about children or if we're talking about athletes. Like, when a guy misses a team meeting, he's expressing a message. He's trying to say something. When a guy might be showboating or extravagant, I think he's trying to say a message. So the thing that I always sit down with parents and with coaches, I just say, you know what? Here's a great way to start. Person's name. I saw that you did this. I'm not sure I fully understand why you did it, but I think you're trying to tell me something, and I want you to know that I'm listening. And then just be quiet and hear what they have to say.
Amani, I see you nodding your head. I'm not sure if that's you thinking about your kids as they get older and start playing sports, or if you had a loved one come to you and the conversation wasn't clicking. I'm not going to pretend I know the answer to that, so I will just throw it out to you.
Oh, yeah. So my freshman year at Michigan, I hated it. I hated playing. I hated everything. It was just so hard. I mean, college football was the hardest thing I've ever done because, you have the two-a-days. We had 3 weeks of two-a-days at the time because they had the freshman two-a-days. Then they had the two-a-days with the upperclassmen. And you're doing two-a-days for almost a month. And it was just really mentally draining. So anyway, I got through the freshman year, and then I wanted to leave. I was going to head off to the UCLA. I was going back to the West Coast, and it was going to, be great. And I talked to but I was doing great. I was starting as a receiver. Everybody looked at, just like Jake said, everybody looking in would say, "Oh man, you're doing great. You're playing. You're at Michigan. You started." And I'm just like, this is terrible. And so what happened? I told my dad that, and I was transferring. I'm leaving, and my dad got on a plane, flew out to Michigan, and spent a week with me. And we didn't really talk about anything, just the fact that he was there and he was supportive, and he, outside of any of the stuff that, everybody else expected of me, he was just there for me. And that was one of the best experiences I had with my father ever, and it was just one of those things where he just was there and he just was supportive. And there was no strings attached. I didn't have to explain him all this stuff. He was just there, and his presence showing me that he cared was the biggest thing that I felt for me, helped me. I stayed at Michigan. I went there 4 years, and I graduated. So I attribute a lot of that to the fact that my father actually came out, took time out of his work to come and care for me. And I was going through a lot of mental struggles because going from Berkeley, California, going to Ann Arbor, Michigan is not an easy thing.
Well, and think about the timing of this, because this is before the transfer portal, right? And I think the nice thing about the transfer portal is it gives a level of empowerment to the student athletes where they can make choices and all that, but it also might inhibit an opportunity to process some of the discomfort that Amani just described going through.
Yeah,
So,
now you just leave. You don't feel comfortable, you just leave.
well,
Or you're not starting, you just leave.
It happens.
I mean, look, every solution has a new set of problems, right?
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting is we did solve some really important problems with the transfer portal, but we also have missed an opportunity to process the way Amani just described.
Well, I'll take since we're talking about buzzwords, transfer portal being one of them, name, image, and likeness. Student athletes are already trying to juggle playing, going to school, and having what little social life athletes can have. And now there's this opportunity to monetize. From the mental health standpoint, have you talked to your staff about how do we structure this to help them get through the additional pressure of trying to land deals for themselves without dissuading them or making them feel like we're not supporting the opportunity to do that, you know?
Yeah, it's finding that balance, like with everything else. Name, image, and likeness. We're building the plane as we're flying it, right? Each state law is different. There is a lot of wild west out there right now, and so I've been actually pleasantly surprised that it hasn't gotten into the locker room. Locker room doesn't lie, right? That's gotten to my desk. That doesn't mean that there hasn't been something, but I can tell you now that we're a year into it, it's part of the recruiting conversation. And so 10 years ago, we weren't talking about mental health when it came to recruiting. We weren't, but we are now. And what NIL is going to become part of is listen, there are young men and young women that have had market value that they haven't been able to obtain. There's no doubt about that. Montana Fouts, who's a softball pitcher for us, she's a rock star, and she's doing some really cool things in the NIL landscape, and I'm happy for that. I think that's good. What I struggle with is where I was talking to an NFL president one day, and I said, "Hey, does your left guard, they get the NIL deals?" And he's like, "No, not really." And I don't know if it was different when y'all were with the Giants or the Bears or anything like that. Left guards in college are going to get NIL deals because recruiting's part of it, okay? And so we have not managed that as an enterprise in a manner that we should have. We got stuck in saying this is the way it's been, it's the way it's always going to be, like two-a-days, right? We don't do two-a-days anymore.
Man.
I mean, you'd come watch practice and you're like, man, where are the pads? You know, it evolves and it changes, okay? And so we've had to deal with that. And so I think just like the phones, what I talked about earlier, where there's that pressure to where's my part of it, I think you're going to start to see that over time, because families are going to start saying in the recruiting process, well, tell me about what you all have done. And the state of Alabama, we legally cannot put a deal together. Now, somebody outside of our department can, but legally I can't call Joe Smith or Jane Smith and say, I'd really like, Joey over here or Janie over here to get a NIL deal. I cannot do that. And so, but it's going to be paid attention to, and right now we're hearing all the stories and trying to decide what's accurate, what's not accurate.
Yep,
and
sure.
And so we'll figure it out in time. I hope we do get some federal help at some point, but we'll figure it out in time. And I am excited for the opportunities that are coming along, but it does add another set of pressures on there when you are trying to balance being a student, being an athlete, being a college student, and the social experiences that come along with it. And y'all were talking about it earlier. One thing that people forget, and especially now that everybody has a platform through social media, these are 18 to 22-year-old young men and young women. They are developing who they are personally. They're still trying to figure a lot of it out. Heck, I'm 50. I'm trying to still figure some of it out, right? And so putting that additional pressure, whether it is name, image, and likeness, whether it is social media, on the young people in our programs, no wonder we're having more. We had almost I told you the number we spent. We had 5,000 behavioral medicine interactions, whether it's sports psychology, mental health training, whatever it is, in about a 1.5 year period since COVID started.
Sure.
The pressures that they are feeling in so many different ways already, and then you add COVID on top of it. Now you add NIL, you add all the other things. It's a lot, when I was 18 years old, I don't know if I would have handled it very well, quite frankly.
I'm relatively certain I would not have handled it well.
And Bonnie, if I can, before you transition, while we're talking about the NIL, because if we transition for a sec away from football, I think here's a fact that's not talked about enough, in my opinion. Of all the sports at the NCAA level, there's only 2 where the men wear less clothes than the women.
I'm so glad you brought this up. I was going to get to it. Go ahead.
And so when you think about the NIL, which is, again, every solution has a new set of problems. It's solving a lot of problems as far as equality and money and opportunity for these young men and young women. There is a side effect mental health issue, which is to say, why does women's volleyball wear less clothes than men's volleyball? Why is gymnastics, this doesn't make a lot of sense, but I think it might fold into the NIL discussion, and I think there could be a real mental health side effect.
Body image.
Yep.
100%. And it's something that resonates with me because I did gymnastics. And there are certain sports, gymnastics, volleyball, swimming and diving, track, where if you look at the number of likes, there's a direct correlation to how much clothing they're wearing.
Wow.
And body positivity and body image, we're talking about that, again, in a way that we haven't been, in large part because of the growth and the influence and the impact of social media. So, it's great that we're leveraging football and the gladiator sport, to be able to create an open environment for having these conversations, but it's certainly not exclusive to them or the pressures of the revenue sports. This is something that does not discriminate gender-wise, age-wise, or sport-wise. Yeah. We have just a few minutes left. I want to ask you guys about resources, but does anybody in the audience have a question? We've got a microphone floating around somewhere, I believe. Yes, right up here. Is that a Chiefs jersey? Who are you rooting for? You're rooting for Patrick Mahomes? I'm sure Bama and Jordan will be thrilled to hear that. What's your question?
I have a question for Jake and Amani. When you were playing what you thought was your worst game ever mentally, how did you come back from that to go play normally as good as you guys were?
Great question.
For me, it wasn't a game, it was the injuries. So I tore my ACL in the bowl game. It was my second ACL. I rehabbed that for 1.5 years. I come back, I'm starting in Denver, everything's going well. I'm actually playing your Chiefs on Monday night. I was gonna be featured in the offense. I'm thinking to myself, I'm gonna outplay Travis Kelce, and I'm gonna put myself on the map. Remember, 18-month rehab. I tore my ACL again.
Oof.
I rehabbed that for 9 months. I get cleared 9 months later. 2 days later, I re-tear both my meniscus. I'm out for the season. So in my first 3 years in the NFL, I played 3 games, and I'd never been injured in my life. That's gonna take you to some mental, really, really tough places. For me, I'm thankful for this. I think this is a good lesson, is a very dangerous place is to be uncomfortable, but comfortable enough that you're not forced to change. For me, it was my rock bottom. I was so uncomfortable that I had to change my perspective on life, had to change the way I prepared, my outlook, forced me to get into meditation, journaling, mental coaching, change my off-season training, because there's a mental aspect of being able to go back out there after multiple surgeries and say, hey, I'm gonna play at a high level and not get injured again. So how I got over that was doing all these foundational things of meditation, seeing a counselor, having tough conversations, journaling, a lot of those things that I'm thankful for these tough times because I still do them to this day, even in my post-football career. It's something I'll do for the rest of my life.
Go top that, Amani.
I don't know if I could top that. I didn't journal. Well, my first couple years in the league, I got drafted really high, and I was expected to play right away. But back then, the difference between the pro style and college was dramatic.
Sure.
I remember, if our quarterback didn't point out the blitzer, we didn't adjust in Michigan. So, and in the pros, you have to know the protections to make sure that if he blitzes, automatically the quarterback's going to throw the ball quick. I didn't know any of that. So if you get the quarterback hit in the NFL, that's where you give you a bus ticket, the next bus ticket out of town, because the quarterback is the franchise. So I wasn't really prepared for the next level. So I struggled, and going into my third year, the second year off season, I was like, look, I hate this. I'm sitting on the bench. They got guys who were free agents starting over me. And I was like, this is crazy. I was, big recruit, whatever. And then I said, I'm gonna give it one more chance. And so that off season, I worked out first of all, I went to my coach and I was like, what do I need to do to start? He goes, well, first you don't know the offense. I was like, okay. And then you're not that tough. I'm like, okay. Then he's like, you're out of shape. I'm like, all right. And then you gotta, what else did he say? You gotta,
That's a good list.
well, it went on. So that day, I was like, okay, all those things that he said I'm gonna take them off the table. So I worked out every day. I took Kung Fu to try to get my hands right so I can get off the line of scrimmage. And I started, doing martial arts. And so the next time I walked into training camp, I knew the whole offense. I grabbed the quarterbacks, told them to get me in the. So those are the situations where I was at my lowest in my entire career. I brought myself back up just because I was like, I'm gonna give it one more chance. And if it doesn't work, I'm gonna walk away from the NFL and I'll be all right saying, you know what, the NFL just wasn't for me. I gave it my best. There's no shame in failing if you give it your best. If like the boxers, there's no shame in a boxer getting knocked out because he actually got in the ring, he actually trained for it, he did everything he possibly could, and if that man's better than you, then he's just better than you. And if the NFL was just better than me, then it's just better than me, better than me. So I just you got to put yourself out there, and sometimes you're going to get chopped off, sometimes you're going to succeed, and that's just the way I look at. I try to look at everything because the one thing that I don't want to have is regrets that I didn't try hard enough, or I could have tried harder. I should have done this. I still have thoughts like that about stuff that I did when I played in the NFL, but at the end of the day, more often than not, I can go back to the point where I prepared myself the best I could do. I got ready. I did everything I could possibly do, and whatever else happened was just in the cards.
That's awesome advice and really great stories I'm sure will resonate. We have time for one more question. We good? Yes, sir. Oh, where's the microphone? Coming around for you. We gotta make this quick, guys.
Okay, this is a question for Jake. It's kind of a little off topic, but you mentioned the bowl situation, and obviously you've been a poster child with regards to the opt-out conversation for many years now. I'm just curious your thoughts about Kirk Herbstreit's comments last week and kind of the balance of making a business decision versus loving or being passionate about football.
I don't think, guys aren't sitting out because they don't love the game of football. That's not the case. You wouldn't be in that position if you didn't love the game of football. So people got to understand, man. For me, I always knew there was life after football. I knew I was going to, my mom wasn't going to get her lights turned off or, she didn't have to worry about making rent. That's the reality for a lot of people. So if you come from that situation, you have an opportunity to guarantee yourself $5, $10, $15 million. Do what's best for you. Surround yourself with the right people, gather all the possible information that you can, and do what's best for you. We talk about loyalty. Brian Kelly, Notre Dame, had Alabama lost, Notre Dame might have been in the playoffs, and he left down south for $100 million. So we can't hold a 20, 21-year-old kid to a higher standard than we do a $100 million head coach. This is the world we live in. Let's not complain about it. This is just the world we live in now. Let's make it equal for everybody, make sure everybody's treated fairly.
To wrap it up, I would like to ask each one of you to make one suggestion, whether it's a book, an app, a particular resource that might serve our audience well, serve athletes well, serve parents well. I will start. Kevin Warren, the new commissioner for the Big Ten, gifted every single student athlete the Calm app. And when I heard about that, I thought it was really interesting, and I downloaded it. And it's been fantastic in helping me deal with some of the stress of my line of work and some of the anxiety. So I would recommend that one. Greg?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, Bonnie. My wife, Regina, has been using Calm and really likes it. I've been using a program called Vision Pursue. And John Curry, who was the AD at Tennessee and now is the AD at Wake Forest, he actually recommended it to me about 4 years ago. And it is all the things we talked about. It is journaling, Amani, so and actually I'm like, man, I'm not sure about the journaling. And it's actually been helpful. There's a real positive part about it. There's meditation, there's just life, short videos, and you can do it all in about 15 to 20 minutes a day. There are some meditations that are longer. Listen, I grew up praying in church, but really that's meditation, right? If you think about it. And so it's actually helped me where when I pray, I get done, I'm like, dang, I felt like I was much more focused on that than where I was before. So the program's called Vision Pursue. I love it. It's awesome.
Vision Pursue and Calm. Jake, what you got?
So it's a kind of a lesson I learned, and I think perspective matters. So I think, we touched on this, is discomfort and challenges and adversity are going to happen to all of us. It's inevitable. It's going to happen multiple times in your life. Behind these challenges and adversity is an opportunity for growth. That perspective, I've found, has been the key to growth and success in life. When life comes and kicks you in the butt a little bit, put a smile on your face and ask, how can I grow through this? How can I be better through this? When you walk through the smoke, you're going to come out the other side a better person. It's going to inevitably happen to all of us. Young man, it'll happen to you one day in whatever sports or whatever you do in life. Smile through it, grow through it, lead, and it just gives you a little bit of added motion to a little bit of added help to go through the tougher times.
That's one of the biggest lessons, learning how to retrain your brain to process the value of failure.
Yep.
Failure is not a bad thing. It's actually a great thing if you consciously decide to think about it that way. Scott?
I think the recommendation that I would guide people towards is being a well-informed decision maker. I think when it comes to mental health, mental wellness, anyone can be an advice giver. Whether we're going to get our hair cut or we're ordering another round at the bar, we're constantly talking to human beings, and anyone can be an advice giver. And I think sometimes, just bringing the conversation full circle to what really resonates with Amani said about, trust. So I think one of the ways to really establish trust quickly is to look for a licensed provider versus just maybe a fan or somebody who's out there self-promoting. And so if you're a well-informed decision maker when you're seeking that care, I think your experience will be a lot more productive and beneficial for you.
Awesome. Monty?
Mine is Audible. I love Audibles because you get to read all these different books, and sometimes when you get caught up in your own situation, you think that you're the only person that's ever gone through it. You think that you're the only person that's ever dealt with these issues. And if you just read books on these types of situations, you'll realize that these situations have been going on throughout time. And you will just figure out all these different ways on how people dealt with it. And I'm telling you, it's one of the best things that I've done since I stopped playing is I got Audible. I read so many. I mean, I don't have to sit there and go through all the books. I just listen to them. I feel like I enjoy them more, and I internalize it more, and I can think about it more. And Audible is by far one of the best, the best apps that I think you can get just to kind of get out of your own circumstance and realize that this world has been going on for a long time. People have written about it, and probably your situation falls somewhere in the context of some other person's experience throughout time.
This has been, I gauge the quality of conversations by how much they inspire me, because I've done a lot of these. This is one of the best panels I've ever had the privilege to be a part of. So thank you all so much for your incredible insight and for your time and your compassion. Ladies and gentlemen, Greg Byrne, Jake Butt, Scott Goldman, and Amani Toomer. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Good job.